Today's Bible story is called What Is It? The Bible memory verse is If you call Sabbath a delight, you will find your joy in the Lord. Isaiah 58:13 and 14. God took such good care of the Israelites. He had freed them from Egypt and destroyed their enemies in the Red Sea, but now they were on their way to the Promised Land through the desert. God loves to provide for His people. He provided the Israelites a cloud to shade them from the hot desert sun in the day. He also sent a pillar of fire to light their camp at night and keep them warm. But not everything was perfect as they traveled through the desert. The Israelites began to worry and complain. It had been 6 weeks already since they had left Egypt, and their food was finishing. It was almost gone. They complained, "Back in Egypt, we had all the food we could eat. But here in the desert, we are going to starve to death." They grumbled bitterly to Moses, their leader. God loves His people. He was not going to let them go hungry and starve to death in the desert. So God spoke to Moses and gave him special instructions. God told Moses that he would feed his people bread from heaven every morning. The people were to go out every morning and gather an omer each. Each person had their own amount every morning, but they were told to not collect extra for the next day because it would not be good anymore. God was testing the people to see if they were following His instructions. And just like God said, the next morning the ground was covered with little thin white flakes. The people were so amazed. "What is it?" they asked again and again to each other. Moses told them, "This is the bread God promised you." So the people called it manna, because manna means, "What is it?" The Israelites kept gathering the manna and tasting it too. It tasted sweet like honey, and there was always enough for everyone. But as the desert sun kept getting hotter and hotter, it melted all of the manna that was left over on the ground. As the Israelites gathered the manna on that first morning, they quickly forgot the instructions God gave Moses. Remember, God said, "Don't keep any for the next day." But some people paid no attention and gathered extra manna. The next day, their leftover manna was full of worms and smelled bad. The Israelites had a lot of work to do in learning how to obey God. On the 6th day, the instruction was different. In order to gather manna, they had to gather double the amount for each family member. Why, you may ask? Well, the 6th day is the day of preparation, because the 7th day is the holy Sabbath of the Lord. In it we shall do no work. God was providing extra manna for them on the 6th day, for them to gather, prepare, and cook it, and have it ready for the next day, the 7th day Sabbath, so His people wouldn't have to work and spend time away from Him. God wanted to dwell with His people. The double portion they were told to gather to keep for Sabbath would not get wormy and smelly. But some people didn't gather twice as much that Friday. They still didn't follow the instructions. Instead, they got up on Sabbath morning expecting to find manna. They had to learn their lesson the hard, hungry way. Of course, There was no manna on the ground that Sabbath morning, and there was none on any Sabbath that came after. How long will they refuse to follow my instructions? God sighed to Moses. The story of manna teaches us that we honor God when we obey Him. Following His directions is an act of worship. Obedience is love and worship to our God. But it also teaches us that God knows what's best for us. His plans for us is for our own good. Following His instructions is the only way to be truly happy. It took the Israelites a while to learn that they needed to follow God's instructions about the manna, and I am happy to say that they finally learned. And it's a good thing, because that's what God fed them for 40 years they spent in the wilderness. They also learned how important the Sabbath is to God. He wanted them and us to make it a special day, different from other days. When they kept Sabbath special, when they didn't work by gathering manna, they were showing God their love and obedience, and they were really worshiping Him. Let us all follow that example and keep the Sabbath holy with love and worship. A bonus fact for today's story is that God provided for His people not only manna, but also quail birds. The manna came in the mornings, and the quail birds came in the evenings for dinner time. Another interesting fact, in the Bible we can read that God told Moses to save some manna to serve as a reminder for future generations of the good things He had done for them. Sometime later, as they continued to wander through the desert, God gave Moses another set of instructions. He told him and the people to build a sanctuary so He may dwell among them. In the sanctuary, inside of the Ark of the Covenant, is where they kept the jar filled with manna, alongside the Ten Commandments and Aaron's staff. May we also remember how good God has been to each and one of us, and may we rejoice on His holy Sabbath day. May we learn to trust and obey from our hearts. Have a happy Sabbath, everyone. Until next time. Goodbye.